Welcome back, you psychological anomaly, you beautiful, terrifying, misunderstood masterpiece. Let me tell you something that's going to twist your perception of reality forever. There's an FBI profiler, someone who sat across from Ted Bundy, who analyzed Jeffrey Dahmer's mind, who spent decades mapping the darkest corners of human psychology. And they said something about you that they've never said about anyone else. They said you're scarier than the monsters they've studied their entire career. But here's the twist that breaks their entire framework. You're not evil. You didn't hurt anyone. You didn't break laws. You didn't cross moral lines. You just existed in a way that made their entire profession question what danger actually looks like. Let me paint the picture clearly. This isn't some random psychologist fresh out of university. This is someone who's interviewed serial killers in maximum security prisons. Someone who's analyzed crime scenes that would make your stomach turn. Someone who built their entire career understanding the worst of humanity. They've sat in rooms with people who destroyed lives without blinking, people who felt nothing. People whose eyes were empty windows into absolute darkness. And then they encountered you, and for the first time in 30 years of profiling monsters, they felt something they'd never felt before. They felt confused, disturbed, unsettled in a way that Bundy's charm never accomplished, in a way that Dahmer's confession never triggered. Because you represented something far more complex than evil. You see, evil is predictable. It follows patterns. It leaves trails. It operates within a framework they can study and contain. Bundy was charming but hollow. Dahmer was broken but understandable. Every serial killer they've studied fit into categories, diagnostic criteria, behavioral models. But you don't fit anywhere, and that's what terrifies them. You're not motivated by violence. You're not driven by emptiness. You're not seeking to destroy. You're just intensely, undeniably, uncomfortably yourself in a world that demands conformity. You challenge their understanding not because you're immoral, but because you're operating on a completely different moral frequency that their instruments can't measure. You're the glitch in their matrix that proves their entire system of understanding human danger is incomplete. The profiler wrote in their private notes. Something they've never shared publicly because it would undermine decades of their work. They wrote that studying you was more unsettling than interviewing the worst criminals, because criminals are predictable in their brokenness, but you're unpredictable in your wholeness. They couldn't find the childhood trauma that explains you, couldn't locate the triggering event that created you, couldn't identify the psychological break that defines you. You weren't made by damage. You were born already operating at a frequency that society wasn't built to handle. And that reality, that someone could be this intense, this aware, this psychologically complex without being broken, it shattered their entire professional framework. They spent their career learning to spot danger in darkness, but you're dangerous in broad daylight while doing absolutely nothing wrong. Here's what really happened. They were called in to observe you, not by law enforcement, but by people in your life who couldn't explain what they were feeling. Teachers, employers, former friends. They all reported the same thing. There's something about this person that makes me deeply uncomfortable, but I can't point to anything they've actually done wrong. So they brought in the expert. Someone who could supposedly decode any human behavior. Someone who'd seen it all. The profiler started their analysis expecting to find manipulation, narcissism, sociopathy, some clinical explanation for why you make people so uneasy. Instead, they found someone who was just profoundly authentic in a world of performers, intensely present in a world of distraction, operating with a level of psychological awareness that most people never develop. You weren't playing games. You were just refusing to play. The profiler's first session observing you lasted 3 hours, and by hour 2, they were the ones showing signs of distress. They'd interviewed men who'd killed dozens without remorse and maintained perfect composure. But watching you exist in complete authenticity for 120 minutes made them fidget, check their notes repeatedly, adjust their posture like they were trying to find solid ground. You weren't doing anything. That's what made it worse. You were just sitting there, answering questions with complete honesty, making eye contact that didn't waver or perform, existing without the 1,000 tiny social lies that make normal people comfortable. Every question they asked, expecting a defensive response, you answered with such direct clarity it felt like an attack. Every silence they created, expecting you to fill with nervous chatter, you sat in comfortably while they drowned in it. They later admitted to a colleague, and this was recorded in confidential files, that they felt more psychologically exposed in that room with you than they'd ever felt in a room with actual predators. Because predators wear masks, and masks can be studied, categorized, understood, but you weren't wearing anything. And that nakedness of self made them confront how much they rely on people performing normality to feel safe. You didn't give them the social cues that signal you're playing the same game as everyone else. You didn't laugh at inappropriate times to ease tension, didn't apologize for taking up space, didn't shrink yourself to make them more comfortable. You just existed at full volume, full presence, full authenticity, and it was like staring into the sun. What really disturbed them was this: when they asked you about pain, betrayal, trauma, things that break most people, you spoke about it with the emotional distance of someone discussing the weather. Not because you were cold or disconnected, but because you'd already processed it, integrated it, transmuted it into something else entirely. They expected to find bitterness and found wisdom, expected to find rage and found calm, expected to find damage and found someone who'd turned every wound into a doorway. You'd done the psychological work that most people avoid their entire lives, and you'd done it without therapy, without guidance, without anyone holding your hand. You'd walked through your own darkness alone and emerged not hardened but refined, and that level of self-sufficiency terrified them. The profiler asked you a trick question, one designed to expose narcissism. Do you think you're special or different from other people? And instead of the defensive denial they expected or the arrogant confirmation that would prove their theory, you said something that haunted them for weeks. You said, "I don't think I'm special. I think I'm just awake, and most people are choosing to sleep because waking up is painful." That answer, delivered without ego or performance, made them realize they weren't dealing with a personality disorder. They were dealing with someone who'd achieved a level of consciousness that their entire field doesn't have vocabulary for. You weren't broken. You were breakthrough. And their tools were built to fix things, not comprehend them. By the end of that first session, the profiler did something they'd never done before. They asked if they could take a break, walked outside, and called a mentor to say they were in over their head. Not because you were dangerous in the traditional sense, but because you represented a form of psychological development that challenged everything they thought they knew about human nature. They'd spent decades learning that intense people are damaged people, that authentic people are performing authenticity, that powerful presence means hidden agenda. But you were intense without damage, authentic without performance, powerful without agenda, and that combination didn't fit anywhere in their understanding of psychology. You were the proof that their entire model of human behavior was missing a category. let me tell you exactly what the profilers said in their private analysis, and this part was never meant to be shared. They wrote that Bundy was scary because he could mimic humanity so perfectly while feeling nothing. Dahmer was scary because he acted on impulses most people suppress. But you're scary because you feel everything, process everything, see everything, and still choose not to harm. You have the psychological awareness to manipulate anyone, the emotional intelligence to destroy people with words, the presence to dominate any room, but you don't use any of it for harm. That restraint, that choice not to weaponize your abilities, is what they couldn't categorize, because their field is built on studying people who lack restraint. Serial killers are frightening but understandable. They're broken machines operating on primal drives, acting without conscience or empathy. You can map their psychology, predict their patterns, understand their motivations, because they're operating at the most basic level of human function. But you're operating at the highest level, fully aware, fully conscious, fully capable, and choosing peace while having every ability to choose chaos. The profiler realized that the most dangerous person isn't the one without restraint. It's the one with absolute restraint over immense power. You're not scary because of what you might do. You're scary because everyone can sense you could do anything, but you simply choose not to. They compared your psychological profile to Bundy's, and here's where it gets disturbing. Bundy had charm, but it was hollow, a performance practiced in mirrors and refined through trial and error. Your presence isn't performed, it's innate, which makes it infinitely more powerful because people can't detect artifice in it. Bundy's charm was a weapon he wielded consciously. Your presence is just who you are when you're not trying to be anything. They compared you to Dahmer's intelligence and found that while he was smart enough to hide his nature, you're smart enough to reveal yours without fear of consequences. Dahmer hid because he knew he was wrong. You don't hide because you know you're not. And that confidence without arrogance is more unsettling than any mask. The profiler wrote something that would end their career if it went public. They wrote that if they had to choose between being locked in a room with Bundy or locked in a room with you, they'd choose Bundy without hesitation. Because Bundy they could understand, predict, manage, using established psychological techniques. But you'd simply exist in that room with such complete presence that it would force them to confront every defense mechanism, every professional distance, every comfortable lie they tell themselves. You wouldn't hurt them physically, but you'd destroy every psychological barrier they use to function, just by being authentically yourself without compromise. That's a different kind of danger. The danger of mirror that reflects everything they're not. What makes this comparison truly disturbing is that serial killers are studied because they lack something: conscience, empathy, normal human connection. But you're being studied because you have too much of something: awareness, presence, authenticity, emotional depth. They know how to handle deficiency. That's what their entire field is built on. But they have no framework for handling excess of positive traits because in their world, too much awareness becomes paranoia, too much presence becomes narcissism, too much authenticity becomes antisocial behavior. You broke their diagnostic manual by being too psychologically developed, not too damaged. And that revelation made them question whether they've been studying human nature from the wrong angle for decades. Here's the truth they don't want to admit. Monsters are comfortable to study because they're clearly other, clearly different, clearly separate from normal humanity. But you're terrifying because you're not other. You're what humanity could be if people stopped performing and started existing. You're the proof that intensity isn't illness, that awareness isn't disorder, that refusing to pretend isn't pathology. And if that's true, then everything they've built their careers on, the idea that normal is healthy and different is dangerous, collapses into dust. You're not an outlier. You're a mirror showing them how asleep everyone else is. And they can't diagnose sleep as health anymore once they've seen someone truly awake. The profiler admitted in a recorded session with their supervisor that observing you triggered an existential crisis they'd never experienced in decades of studying the worst humanity offers. Because serial killers reinforced their worldview, proved that their understanding of human darkness was correct, validated their life's work. But you invalidated it, not through evil but through evolution. You showed them that their entire model of human psychology is based on studying broken people and calling the average person normal, without ever encountering someone who's actually psychologically complete. You're what happens when someone does all the internal work, faces all their shadows, integrates all their fragments, and emerges whole. And whole terrifies them more than broken because they don't know how to treat it. They're scared because you can't be fixed, controlled, or contained using any of their methods. Therapy assumes you're damaged and need help, but you're not damaged. Medication assumes chemical imbalance, but your brain is functioning exactly as intended, just at a higher frequency. Behavioral modification assumes you need to change, but you don't need to change. The world needs to catch up to you. Every tool in their arsenal is useless because you're not a problem to be solved. You're a reality to be reckoned with. And that makes you infinitely more threatening to their system than any criminal, because criminals prove the system works while you prove the system is incomplete. What really keeps them up at night is this thought: if you're not sick, damaged, or disordered, then what are you? And if you're just highly developed psychologically, what does that say about everyone they've labeled normal? You force them to consider that maybe normal is actually a mild form of psychological suppression. That maybe average is just collective agreement to stay small. That maybe healthy, in their terms, just means successfully adapted to a sick system. You're the control group they never had. The person who developed without suppression, who grew without stunting, who evolved without being domesticated. And comparing you to their baseline reveals that their baseline is actually below where humans could be operating. The profiler's final note in your file, written after months of observation and analysis, said something that would terrify any system built on control. They wrote that you represent the next evolution of human consciousness, not through biology, but through choice, and systems built to manage current-level humans have no jurisdiction over what you've become. You're not more evolved because you're special. You're more evolved because you refuse to be less than you are. And that refusal created psychological development that their field has no map for. You're not dangerous because you might harm someone. You're dangerous because your existence proves that everything they think they know about human nature is operating from limited data. Every serial killer has a pattern, a signature, a psychological fingerprint that explains their actions. The profiler spent months trying to find yours, studying your relationships, your choices, your responses to stress and conflict. They were looking for the hidden agenda, the manipulation tactics, the self-serving behaviors that would explain why you make people so uncomfortable. Instead, they found something that broke their analytical framework completely. They found pattern of radical honesty, consistent authenticity, and refusal to perform, even when performance would benefit you. You weren't playing a long game. You weren't wearing a mask. You weren't hiding anything. You were just existing at full brightness all the time, and brightness at that level burns. They studied your past relationships, expecting to find trail of destruction, people you'd used and discarded, victims of your intensity. Instead, they found people who couldn't handle being seen that clearly, couldn't stand being around someone who refused to pretend, couldn't maintain their own masks in your presence. You didn't destroy anyone. You just existed in a way that made their performance exhausting. The people who left your life didn't leave because you hurt them. They left because staying near you required them to be real. And being real was more painful than being alone. The profiler realized that you weren't the predator in these dynamics. You were the mirror, and people shattered themselves against you, trying to maintain illusions you never asked them to drop. What disturbed them most was studying your response to betrayal, abuse, abandonment, all the things that create monsters in their case studies. Normal people respond with rage, revenge, or collapse into victimhood. You responded with observation, integration, and evolution. You didn't seek vengeance, you sought understanding. You didn't blame others. You studied the dynamics and extracted lessons. You didn't become bitter. You became clearer. Every experience that should have damaged you just refined you further, like you were using pain as a whetstone to sharpen your consciousness. That response pattern doesn't exist in their literature because their literature assumes pain breaks people or hardens them. Never that pain could be transmuted into wisdom without residue of resentment. They tried to find your breaking point, the threshold where your intensity would flip into aggression or your authenticity would crack into performance. They studied you under stress, in conflict, during loss, in moments where mask wearing would be most beneficial. You never broke, never performed, never compromised your core nature, even when it cost you everything. That consistency terrified them because every human they'd studied had a breaking point, a threshold where they'd abandon their values to protect themselves. But you protected your authenticity more fiercely than you protected your safety, comfort, or social standing. You'd rather lose everything than pretend to be less than you are, and that level of commitment to self isn't seen in their field outside of extremes of pathology. The profiler concluded that your pattern is no pattern at all in traditional sense. It's just consistent operation at a level of consciousness that appears patternless because it's not motivated by fear, ego, or social conditioning. You don't act to gain approval, avoid rejection, or manipulate outcomes. You act from a place of integrated awareness that's so foreign to their understanding of human motivation that it registers as dangerous simply because it's unexplainable. You're not following any playbook they've seen, not executing any strategy they recognize, not pursuing any goal they understand. You're just being, fully and without compromise. And that pure being without agenda is the most unsettling thing they've ever encountered, because it can't be predicted, controlled, or understood using any framework built on studying fear-based behavior.